Good to go, Renuka.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I can see some of you still joining in, and that's perfectly fine. But I will begin anyway in the interest of time, given that it's a Sunday, and we're very happy that everybody who could be available today to be an audience for this very special program could join us. So welcome on behalf of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, Mumbai. We're very happy to be doing this on Martyrs' Day, and it is quite significant to reflect on thoughts and ideologies, and what better way to commemorate it than through the language of textile, which of course is what we know Gandhiji was very close to, particularly when he spoke about it so passionately. And of course, most of his teachings and actions speak volumes about his relationship with textiles. So we have with us today somebody very special. We have somebody who's been studying Gandhiji for a really long time, but also has very intimate relationship with textiles, because she is an artist, but has also studied design in great depth. But before I introduce her, I would just like to thank all the audiences who've been supporting all of our programs through the month. And it's particularly special for the CSMVS because we are in our centenary year. So we complete 100 years of being open to the public. And we've commemorated that occasion on the 10th of January. We couldn't do it in person, but we did it digitally. And those of who could join us for the program, and you can still watch it on YouTube. It's available on our channel, CSMBS Mumbai. Thank you so much for your support. We're still in our centenary month, and we will continue to do programming that is meaningful, that speaks the language of the museum, everything we stand for, and everything we've been trying to do differently. So stay tuned with everything that will be coming up digitally and even in person as soon as we reopen yet again. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening. Firstly, thank you so much, Shelly ji, for accepting our invitation and being available today. Of course, being a Gandhi expert, so I think you would have had several invitations and you chose to accept us, so that's very nice. I will just run a quick introduction. So Ms. Shelly Jyoti is a visual and a textile artist. She's a fashion designer. She's a poet and an independent curator. Her work focuses on Gandhi's ideology of nation building for creating moral and peaceful societies relevant for the 21st century. She works with various media, excavating from colonial history and celebrating the subaltern. She's trained as a fashion designer from NIFT in New Delhi, which is the National Institute of Fashion Technology, and she's earned her master's in English literature from the Punjab University in Chandigarh. Her most recent exhibition and lecture was Epoch 2020, which focused on the relevance of Gandhi in the present tense, time, rebirth, iconology. Of course, I'll leave it up to her to explain that to us a little more. Now over to you, Ms. Shelly, and I hope you all find this talk quite illuminating.
Okay. Namaskar and a very good evening to you all. Thank you for the kind introduction, Renuka. It's a great honor and a privilege to be speaking about Gandhiji's relevance during the pandemic times through an artist lens. I'm grateful to the Director General, Sir Dr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, and the governing body of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya Museum for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and presentation of my artworks. And thank you to Jyoti Roy, and of course Renuka, for extending the invitation. I'm indeed very humbled. At the outset, paying my humble tributes and remembering Gandhiji on his 74th Punyatithi or Martyrs' Day and the ongoing worldwide celebrations of his 105th birth centenary reflects Gandhi's experiments with truth are significant in all times to come and remain relevant across the generations. I quote granddaughter of Gandhiji, Shrimati Tara Gandhi Bhattacharya. She says, the quest to know more of Gandhi than ever before is like chasing the golden deer of Ramayana that runs in pursuit of worldly attraction. Today, the man is in search of Gandhi to know and explore solution to the contemporary crisis. The fact is, Gandhi resides in all of us. He introduces himself to those who are in search of self. We are in the thrust of tumultuous global pandemic that the century hadn't ever seen or visualized. The history seemed halted, and we all witnessed the sufferings of unimaginable dimensions, posing many existential questions and exposing the limits of modernity. And I quote Gandhi here, and he says, if India as a civilization followed the Western capitalist society, we will end up being wage slaves of the mechanized living. The idea of self realization and soul searching was the biggest takeaway from Gandhi during pandemic. The pause that we all experienced was moments of self introspection as what were the human errors that the result to pandemic of this magnitude is beyond human repair. Gandhi's message once again stood with the moral and spiritual compass to the humanity, inspiring us to stretch beyond ourselves and to get in touch with the power that lies hidden within us. Gandhi writes in the beginning chapters of his autobiography that the premise of the message of his life begins with self realization. In my art practice, the content is self realization for building moral and peaceful societies. On the hypothesis of Gandhi's experiments with Swadharma, which is adherence to one's duty, Sarvodaya, which is upliftment for all, Swadeshi is to be self reliant, Swaraj, an idea of self control, through my four major exhibitions and one in making, referring to Gandhiji's Champaran movement, 1917-18, Salt March movement, 1934, Swadeshi movement, to be self-reliant, and Swaraj as community and nation building. I quote Lord Bhikkhu Parekh here. He says, Gandhi is nation's treasure. Whenever you wish to read him, you will cherish him. His assets are never devalued. And to me, Gandhiji is a timeless phenomenon. He remains a source of inspiration for all humanity. And just for a second, I'll go on a smaller screen by sharing my presentation. So the title of my talk today is Revisiting Gandhi in Pandemic Times, an artistic journey through Ajrak textile traditions. The lecture will attempt to share my creative journey as a textile artist through khadi scrolls, installations, and if time permits, a short film exploring two key questions. First, in the 21st century, can the idea of Swadharma as adherence to one's duty, Sarvodaya, upliftment for all, Swadeshi, to be self-reliant, and the idea of self-duty towards our country, an important thread that can bring positive changes in our society. And secondly, how can textiles, both as material objects and because of their artistic form, be used to stitch together urban and rural communities and giving honor to the spinner, weavers, and handicraft makers. So the four major exhibitions were Untitled Indigo Narrative, 2009, Salt the Great March, 2013, the Khadi March, just 5 meters, 2016, Bound by Duty and Idea of Swaraj and Collectiveness, 2018, Epoch 2020, which is my work in progress, Relevance to Gandhi in Present Tense. So this body of work is almost about 10 years, plus the 4 more years on 2 more for the pandemic. I've selected a few slides. In 40 minutes, I'm going to wrap up the whole 14 years of my artwork. My art practice has 2 components. One is Gandhi's thought leadership in relevance to the 21st century for building moral and peaceful societies through the nationalist narratives. The second component is contemporary artistic production with Ajrak textile traditions. It's a heritage. Ajrak is a heritage reverse block printing and dyeing technique. There are many who would know about Ajrak, but for others, this is just a few pointers that I'll talk about Ajrak. But I'd urge them to look up on Google a video, a documentary that I had created in 2016 on mapping Ajrak traditions, which gives you a complete panorama view of how contemporary artists works with the textile tradition. So from technical perspective, Ajrak is a very laborious form of cloth printing resist dyeing technique. I work with the 10th generation Ajrak craftsmen living in Bhuj in Gujarat with Junaid Muhammad Khatri, son of Dr. Ismail Muhammad Khatri, who have been assisting me in this project since 2008. These craftsmen moved from Sindh and Balochistan to Gujarat in 1600 CE. My designs are entirely contemporary interpretation of the politics of indigo, salt and khadi march, and the meaning of Swaraj in relevance to the 21st century. Historically, the history of Ajrak can be traced back 2500 BC to 1500 BC. A bust of King Priest excavated at Mohenjo-daro shows a shawl believed to be an Ajrak draped around his shoulder. This same treefold pattern has been discovered in Mesopotamia, as well as the royal couch of Tutankhamun. The excavated textile fragment, which was found at Al-Fustat harbor of Old Cairo, dating 11 to 14th century AD. These fragments are the earliest known textiles of resist dyeing and madder, bearing a striking resemblance to Ajrak. In 2013, I created an artwork utilizing the same block during my Salt March show, and I titled it as Solidarity. Ajrak also has evidences of trading through the oceanic route. So my idea of looking into a design of the block is the context that I'm working on. This block that narrates solidarity with a thought of collective impact. Hence, these works have a contemporary relevance of the subject that I am narrating. I work on hand-spun, hand-woven khadi that signifies to me the labor of spinning and weaving by hand, and also that has a lineage of India's freedom struggle. I explored the personal, political, social, economic meaning within the context of my art and the Ajrak textile production. So my artworks examine Gandhi's message to humanity, engagement with craft communities, the struggle of India's independence, exploration with heritage textile tradition, and reasons to empower individuals. My canvas becomes khadi, Ajrak blocks become my brushes, and natural dyes become the medium to paint and narrate the historical references that has relevance to the contemporary times. But I attempt to bring relevance of khadi as nation building through my artworks. My journey of understanding Gandhi began in 2008 with my Indigo project that touched the narrative of Champaran movement through the accounts written by Dr. Rajendra Prasad's History of Champaran Satyagraha. Later, I went into deeper inquiry to understand the underlying idea of Swadharma as self-realization through Gandhi's books and as finding a resolve of few incidents that I personally brushed with. The 2002 Gujarat riots, we watched the saddest odyssey of intercommunal violence when one night mob with burning torches headed towards our house. We were constantly dialing 100. Fortunately, the police chief siren and the mob disappeared. In one split second, my teenage children and my husband would have got burnt alive. That feeling of helplessness killed me, being a mother of two teenage children. 26/11 took place, Mumbai attacks. We all are aware of how bombing and shooting at 12 coordinated places lasted for more than 4 days. And the question that bothered us as citizens, how these lads could enter our country from sea route and take the whole country for a ransom. My husband was in the Taj Hotel that night and he was saved by destiny, but many were killed in brutal, unforgettable incidents. The same phase, there was saga of multiple scams, of looting public money, but every day reported with no accountability. Whether all these incidents were security lapse or the government failure, one felt the need of citizen awakening and participative communities And that was the resolve of my duty towards my country, Swadharma and Sarvodaya, getting inspired by Gandhi's study. And I'll quote Henry Beach, a social reformer. He says, every artist dips his brush in his own soul and creates what he encountered in his life. So poetry writing is the first artistic production in the project that I'm working on. So when I was working on this, this was the Gujarat Voice, and I'll read out 4 lines, which perhaps may give you the intensity of an artist's feeling before one creates the work. The sad odyssey, an outburst, mobs crying aloud, looting and arsoning, Mahatma doesn't stop spinning. His head hung in shame, his land is not what he dreamt of. His people are not who he instilled faith in. His eyes shut as if bleeding with tears. His ears shut with communal cacophony. His mouth sealed and virtuous silence. Like the 3 monkeys on my table, Mahatma doesn't stop spinning. This is a roadmap of my journey from 2009 to 21. This is important to show because it'll allow you to contextualize my other artworks that I will just roll out after this. So in 2009, I collaborated with an American and half Japanese artist, Laura Kina. We had a common shared history of indigo. But for me as an Indian artist, I explored the role of indigo in India's freedom struggle and Gandhiji's subsequent intervention as his Champaran movement after he returned from South Africa. And that was also Gandhiji's first experiment with satyagraha. I was inspired by a literary text, Neel Darpan, which gave me a socio-political understanding of how those farmers were ostracized under the British for the Eurocentric need of the indigo color. I explored indigo in the contemporary canon to understand how the dye is being used in the textile tradition, and I reached the Ajra craftsmen, and that this show was my first serious brush with Gandhiji and Ajra. I moved to Salt, the Great March, where I explored the philosophy of Swadharma and Sarvodaya, which I just mentioned in my previous slide. I further investigated the idea of social activism through my works. I personally took journey from Ahmedabad to Dandi to meet freedom fighters. So the show had series of solidarity and flag series on the 2D on Khadi. The next show in 2016 was inspired by Gandhiji's quote, which was, instead of giving 3 paisa to the spinner and weavers, give them 3 annas, and that would mean Swaraj to them. And so the idea of, and this he said to the urban viewer, and I am an urbanite today, and I felt if we are all living in a very mechanized kind of a lifestyles, how are we connected to those 70% of India's rural population? So the concept which I thought about was that if the 30 crore urban population who we represent just buys 5 meters of hand-spun, hand-woven fabric once a year as a duty towards my country, look at the production demand it creates at the spinner and weavers, who are 70% of our population, effortlessly. So it was an idea of consumption from us and a production to them, and a growth to their livelihood. And the idea of 5 meters came from there. And this series had a fashion segment, Clothing Gandhi's Nation. And I dealt with creating a lot of Ajrak artworks with timeless silhouettes and blouses. And I moved to my next show in 2018, which was inspired by Gandhiji's book, Hind Swaraj. I was inspired by the idea of social responsibility and investigated the relationship between self, societies, and social transformation. Fishes became my metaphor, and I'll explain that once I reach to that slide. And then the pandemic came in 2020, and I started documenting the sufferings, which were immense, and one didn't have a way to resolve it. And these works on Epoch 2020 is in response to the lived experience of the global pandemic that posed existential questions, exposing the limits of modernity. And when I say modernity, then once again, I touch Gandhi on his idea of Swaraj, Hind Swaraj, which is a book on critique of modernity. And the resolve was the need of the hour was enduring together the pandemic, endemic, ecodemic, infodemic situations by social involvement with communities, reflecting upon the four S's of adherence to one's duty, upliftment for all, and to be self-reliant and self-control and self-discipline. And this is exactly what I've been talking through my artworks in last 10 years. From Salt the Great March was an idea of Swadharma and Sarvodaya. Khadi March, I was referring to Gandhi's Swadeshi movement to be self-reliant. And in Swaraj, I was talking about collectiveness and how we collectively, and all my artwork started to speak to me. So I transferred all my artworks of 10 years because I couldn't travel to Bhuj. This is where I go to the craftsmen to create my artworks on Khadi, and I transferred them digitally on paper and reworked on them. So I call the Epoch 2020 series, this is a work in progress, and I call them as my rebirth series. And I would show you this. I'll begin with the installation. This is the quote that I just mentioned, which inspired me with the idea of 30% of urban population supporting the rural population. This is a way to connect with the rural and urban. And I quote Gandhi here, if you ensure them 3 annas instead of 3 paisa that they get today, they would think they want Swaraj. And this year addressed to the urban viewer. The title of this installation is Yarn Spring. It's a site-specific installation made of 1,000 bunches of hand-spun cotton yarn, braided and knotted and macrameed. The structure represents the 70% of the Indian population that live in the villages who are spinner and weavers. The spring of yarn is indicative of the economic growth in their livelihoods, and rest follows. As a visual artist, I was exploring the idea of by taking that action of buying 5 meters, it would allow us to question ourselves, do we value craft, artisanal skill, and labor of our rural fellow countrymen and women? And if so, how do we demonstrate this to ourselves and one another? And I quote Gandhi here, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the surface of others. And this installation is on a title, The Great Wall of Spinning Wheels. And I was invited by the National Gallery for Modern Art in Bangalore. And the gallery space had a 50 feet long at a stretch. And that was a joy for me as an artist to spread my these small buttons as charkhas. And this installation was inspired by Gandhiji's quote, which I quote right now: the revival of hand spinning and hand weaving would make the largest contribution to the economic and moral regeneration of India. The message of the spinning wheel is much wider than its circumference. Its message is one of simplicity, service of mankind, living so as not to hurt others, creating an indissoluble bond between the rich and the poor, capital and labor. And I unquote, and these are the buttons that comprised of that 50 feet long wall. And the whole idea was, if the 30 crore urban population starts buying that 5 meter, so many charkhas in the villages will start moving, and and give them more livelihood. So it is the way to connect urban and rural. It's a way of getting a bond between who we can support. It's another way of consumption and production. So the focus on Swadharma in the 5 meters exhibition to buy 5 meters of khadar once a year possesses the potential not only to reclothe the urban India, but also to build bond between the rural and urban. I use Khadi as a medium that can be a catalyst for the new dialogue with the fellow beings in the rural India. And these are my textile artworks, and the title is self-explanatory, where I'm talking about Linderhand. It's a diptych. Through this diptych artwork, I'm trying to engage urban communities in the lives and livelihood of rural Indians and reintroduce the textile tradition to the viewer who come and see my exhibitions as a visual representation. During the freedom struggle, white khadi became the nationalist dress. It was Gandhi's idea to bring unification and true civic engagement of political consciousness in all. The choice of khadi clothing, to me, the choice of khadi clothing means a lifestyle change with a renewed look. And that was a joy for me to went on creating and experimenting with the artworks, which I'll just roll out. It makes us aware of the livelihoods of the spinner and weaver. Clothing as a true civic engagement with the idea of and for my country. In the 21st century, as an artist, I'm exploring the role of clothing as a catalyst of social change. I'm also trying to document the traditional ajrak patterns that has been worn by women of India in the 21st century. So this is the series that I'll be showing you right now is fashion segment, Clothing Gandhi's Nation. So these are timeless silhouettes where I took the blouse block and printed it at one go on the, many people have asked me, is it applique work? So no, for people who are just viewing it on a virtual medium, it is not. It is one whole piece, and I use masking and stenciling technique to create this. On the left-hand side are the full work, and the right-hand side are the excerpts for a better viewing. And these are some of these. The middle piece here has been highly published by different magazines and newspapers. And these are the timeless angrakas. The sizes is 34 to 55 inches. And this is a huge piece where I could create 7 different styles of blouses. And then I started to, this was an installation that I was creating. I'm exploring the transformative possibilities of khadi clothing as a vehicle to articulate new priorities and allegiances to the community through installation of blouses, caps, and ajrak with ajrak printing. And then I moved on to creating, as I mentioned in that fashion segment, I played around with creating jackets and caps and 2D artworks to give not only to give a renewed look to new styling of khadi on a 2D medium, and also to support it with a site specifics of blouses and jackets that I created. And then this is a wall. These are tote bags with khadi and ajrak with the emblem of just 5 meters. So I call it as a consumerist wall. I'm exploring the idea of production and consumption as a means of self-purification and moral regeneration of the society. When I say self-purification, is when you buy something, as I mentioned, let's buy 5 meters, and you know that you're supporting somebody as a spinner and weaver, so it's a feel-good factor. If I feel good, you feel good. It's like society feels good, and that community who feels good is an idea of self-purification. And when the larger number of people do it, it's just a moral regeneration of the society eventually. So as I mentioned, poetry is my first artistic redemption after when I feel I'm thorough with my subject to create what I wish to show in this exhibition. So in the Khadi Marches 5 meters, I'll just read 5 lines for you to get the intensity of an artist with the work in creation. Let's walk with a flame of candles in our hand. Let's ignite this urban socialism. Like a human chain it spreads, you, me, and 300 million of us. An effortless sacrifice and gain. Just 5 meters, my friends, we can do it together. This is a long poetry of about 143 lines, and I normally speak out it and in my exhibitions, but I thought just to give you an intensity of the subject, I must speak these 5 lines to make you aware of how what are the processes of an artist to create. My show of Salt the Great March, which was created in 2013, I explored the possibility of Swadharma and Sarvodaya as a movement that might inspire the societal values, and what are the implications of involving art with the idea of social activism. In this series, I had created Solidarity series. This was an installation that I created where Gandhi demonstrated millions in India around the world the indisputable power of collective non-violent action. Salt the Great March for Gandhi was when he realized the importance of collectiveness and the surge. So these are sails that I created with Sanskrit calligraphy, golden Sanskrit calligraphy, block printed, and the idea was to show the surge and Gandhi's walk. And this exhibition traveled to many different locations. And this particular artwork, it was inspired by the famous Linocut painting by artist laureate of India, Nandalal Bose. I traveled to Dandi during this period, and I personally met the freedom fighters who participated with Gandhi during the Salt March. And one of the common narration between them was Gandhi's walk. And hence this artwork was inspired, and I could show them. So these are some flag series. If you can see the chakras and the charkhas. This is the solidarity. I just wanted to touch upon how when we are creating work with Ajrak, the blue of indigo, if you see in this, there are many, many tones of blue in it. And to achieve those tones, the indigo also comes from the plant and the soil and the rain around. The atmosphere embodies the color of the depth of the indigo. So, so fortunately for me, what I visualize, I could create this in this work. This is an artwork in making. And these are some more. And then Swaraj and collectiveness. In Swaraj and collectiveness, fishes became my metaphor. But why fishes? I had, after finishing going through Gandhi's book, Hind Swaraj, couple times, I still wasn't very clear, how will I show the idea of collectiveness and people who understand the idea of self-duty and self-discipline. And I found an article in National Geographical Channel which said, when millions and trillions of fishes pull together in water, they bring oceanic currents. And I thought, if fishes could bring oceanic currents, fish becomes my metaphor for this show. So I examined the idea of collectiveness and collective impact that can bring about social change with evolved, spiritually aware communities. And the dream was, as an artist, to create these imagined communities of fishes with ajrak and the blue of indigo. I don't know if you have enough time to show you. Anyway, so we will. So these artworks. Imagined community comprises of 8 large panels as murals, narrating the story of collective fishes as collective consciousness. These works have been subconsciously inspired by Monet's water lilies, murals for the scale and magnitude, and the idea was to create an aquarium of ajrak fishes with the visual appeal as entering the waters around 2,000 fishes and panels. And this is one of the panels. This is a 20 feet long panel And this is another one. So effectively, it is an 80 feet long artwork, um, which is one piece, but depends on how I showed on the space I'm offered to exhibit. For a second, just for a minute, I'm just going to end this and come back again. I'll stop my share and I'll begin my share again. And because these videos are not being played, and here I am. And here we are. So these are some of the fishes that I had created during my Swaraj and Collectiveness shows. To bring, the idea was the self-rule and self-control needs to be experienced by each individual. And then there was the show that was began in 2009 was Indigo Narratives, and I mentioned that I touched upon the 20th century, the biggest farmers' agitation, which was also called Neel Bidro, and I narrated the whole story of Neel Darpan through my textile artworks. And again, there is a poetry. I think we are falling short of time, and I will move on. I'll speak a few lines out of it. Mahatma steps in, stop growing indigo. We will fight. We need wheat and rice to survive. For the dying farmers who gave their lives to grow indigo plant, the blood that spilled in the fields of blue is the blood that stained the chest of indigos to reach England. Do we need another Mahatma to fight for the 21st century farmers? The moods of indigo or the moods of indigo. So what I was trying to talk about in this Indigo Narrative show was that how those farmers were forced to grow indigo for the Eurocentric need. And then this installation came in where I paid homage to those farmers who died unsung and unheard. The printed discs are the disc with different traditional indigo dyed print maps the story of the farmers of Champaran. And each circle that you see has multiple voices and as if they're talking to each other. And it's a sordid blue farmer story into one sculptural whole. And this installation was installed at Chicago Cultural Center. But this installation has gone to many different locations. And the biggest honor for me for this installation was when it was exhibited at on the India and Oman 60 years of friendship. And the space that I needed to create it was 60 feet high. So the height kept on going higher. And the challenge was to exhibit more of these circles. And but eventually it was quite satisfactory. And this was at Diana Loinston. This was in Seattle, the same installation. I will move on from here. And this was another installation on again, I'm talking about the blue farmers of Champaran and how these farmers were ostracized for the Eurocentric need of the British. And this was some spinning wheels that I had created. And then came Epoch 2020, which is my present. To give you the COVID stories, which were out there, people are dying in the world. Death, I imagine, is destiny, but it seems many died before they lived their lives. A final destination is resentful, tearful, and unlikely. The pieces of puzzles not fitting it. Life is an epoche. Last piece of that puzzle has still to fit in, restless to fit in with other pieces. And in our journey, bandaged and fractured. And I would just end up with this presentation, which explains how my 10 years of work got rebirth animated. I gave rebirth to my textile artworks of one last decade by digitally transferring the images on Hanamul paper, reworking with inks, blocks, and embroidering with Zardozi gold wires. My new works are in response to the lived experience of unprecedented global pandemic that posed existential, psychic, and spiritual questions, exposing the limits of modernity. This is where I connect once again with Gandhi's book Hind Swaraj, which is a critique of modernity, modern civilization, and mechanized living. If we followed the Western capitalist society, we will end up being wage slaves and lose the moral fiber of the country. M.K. Gandhi. What lies behind? I don't remember. What lies ahead? I cannot foresee. What is time? I know not. Out of rhythm, crazy, unseen. Reconstructing as I breathe. Reconstruction as we move on. Restoration to a new self. Transition is a must. The relevance of adherence to one's duty, upliftment for all, and to be self-reliant, self-controlled are lessons learned during pandemic for community building and supporting each other. We're all together drifting in this golden boat of life. What direction it's flowing, one doesn't know. Humanity steers. Collectively we cross the river of microbes, infinity invisible. And this is the last installation where Gandhi is a timeless phenomenon. This was installed at Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts when I was invited for my 10 years of retrospective show. Just like the moon takes 30 days to finish one cycle of movement around the earth, with crescent getting diminished each day and getting back to the full moon, I feel Gandhi's legacy is eternally relevant in all times to come. I'm inspired by the crescent of the moon that has alluring beauty symbolizing legendary and timelessness. This installation of 12 flags attempts to highlight important Gandhian principles and practices of Swaraj, Sarvodaya, and Swadharma. Without alluding to specific historicity of the events, Gandhi's idea of self-realization seems eternal and embedded in time. And I conclude with a quote with Martin Luther King Jr. If humanity has to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. He lived, thought, and acted, inspired by the vision of humanity evolving towards a world of peace and harmony. We may ignore Gandhi at our own risk. I will close my presentation with a gratitude and thank you to CSM VS Museum for inviting me to share my thoughts and art. Thank you all who joined in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelly ji. I think we all had quite a reflective evening. And as we looked at your artworks, and of course, many of them were so inspiring, but particularly the ones where you focused on telling us where they were drawn from and what inspired them, like the Angarkha, and so many of them drawing from historic pieces. I think there are a couple of questions, and before that, there are some comments where everybody's written quite kind words for you. We've mentioned, they've mentioned their thanks, and Animesh Kapoor says, "What a stellar confluence of handmade and digital media." We would agree.
Thank you.
And yes, Lalit Mohan says something very nice. "You're redefining Gandhi for Gen Next," which is, of course, very kind. There are a couple of questions, and we'll take a few of them. Okay, there's one here. How does Gandhi's ideology link with what is contemporarily considered sustainable fashion or fair trade fashion?
I don't think so. Gandhiji had, though there are a lot of books which talk about Gandhi wearing his loincloth as a style statement or a fashion statement. When he was asked, when he had worn this loincloth, had gone to meet in Britain for a meeting, one of the media reporter asked him, aren't you feeling cold that you're not wearing much clothes? He says, he had a humor to the response, and he said, but the Lord was wearing so many clothes, I really didn't need, that was sufficient enough. So sustainability has also to do with the environment. Gandhi was anyway an environmentalist before the word environment was taken seriously. His idea of being traditional to the concepts of dietary, wearing, traditionalism was always a part of his being. So sustainability, fashion, if he was alive, he would have definitely appreciated to go on. And to me, as I mentioned, the whole Khadi show was an idea to bring an idea of sustainability, that people should understand when I was trying to talk a renewed look of Khadi. And I see a lot of designers in our country are working on Khadi to give a renewed look. Most of the fashion institutes are they have a complete separate what should I say, subjects where the students are taught to create works on Khadi.
I think that sort of sums up the answer to the question very well, that he was in fact an environmentalist before anybody really
Yes.
championed the word with the jargon that it is today.
Yes.
There's one question which asks, could you reflect a little bit more on the history of Ajrak and how does it stay alive today?
Say it again, and how?
Sorry, and could you reflect a little bit on the history of Ajrak and how does it stay alive today?
Well, Ajrak, being a very laborious technique, always gets a challenge of being in the market as sustainable. In terms of when you do for a normal person, it may just look like a block print. But a block print is, if many would know the difference, is if you take a block and you block it on a fabric, the number of hours to create is much less than one Ajrak takes almost about 16 to 18 steps, and so to say roughly about 21 days to create one Ajrak piece. So hence the prices are very high for that. As far the niche of Ajrak in the market is a lot in terms of people who are they're loyal to the fabric, because fabric in itself, once being made in that long period of 21 days, it has a magical appeal. And As far as the history of Ajrak is concerned, I did touch upon the very important points, but I would urge people to see that documentary which I created on a title, Mapping Ajrak Traditions in Contemporary Art and Craft. They must watch that.
I think there's opportunity for one last question. Okay, how could one support the ideology of Gandhi by supporting the arts or the crafts today?
How could one support? I would say you need to be passionate about what you're doing. When I'm on a journey of Gandhi, there was a reason that I explained how I reached towards on the study of Gandhi, and again, the answer is sustainability. You need to look at the points where you can pick up the art and craft. And as a 21st century, either you're a designer or an artist, give a contemporary look to it. I mean, when I'm creating what I'm creating, eventually I'm trying to document the 200 to 300-year-old blocks. And when they go, the sari that one wears, it can be washed and worn off. But sustainable art, which goes in the museum, I mean, the art will live longer. If you touch upon a craft and through an art, and if it goes into the museums, then the craft is documented. It's saved for hundreds of years. And it's an individual direction which he or she wants to take.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, specifically for shining light on the fact that documentation is so crucial for the arts and to keep them going. And that's what the museum does, and that's what organizations all across the world have been trying to do through individual and collective attempts, like you said, the power of the collective.
Yes.
But thank you so much. I would not want to keep our audiences any longer. Thank you so much for being so patient with us. Thank you for giving us your time and joining us on Martyrs Day to reflect a little bit on Gandhiji. Thank you, Shaliji, for that incredible journey. And we can all, of course, go back and watch the documentary and learn more about Ajrak and everything you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the whole session and the question answers and the kind words from many, and I will look into all of them after the event. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'll sign off. Yeah.